Another episode of the Village Boy podcast. This is your host, Chief Village Priest Trez. Welcome to all the villagers and new people to this channel. This is a channel where we talk about training issues. It's African American history, Black history, and we decided to explore a few issues or the topic of Black history. It's important to have a conversation to try to understand the historic context of Black history, but not in, say, the accomplishments, which there are many of the Black Americans, foundational Black Americans here, is to understand where the name African American comes from and the historic context of every other American group vis-a-vis the African Americans. And so then we understand the implication of that name and how that works in favor or in disfavor of this community of people. Myself, I was not born in the United States of America, and so my understanding of this is going to be different. And that's why on this page we don't claim absolute knowledge. We just try to have a conversation. And if you like it, please the page subscribe, share, and let's have a fair and nuanced conversation on issues like this. We do not take sides as Black History Month in the United States that symbolizes the accomplishments of Black folks and the rich history of Black Americans in America. America is a country of immigrants. The only people that are not immigrants are the First Nation people who America calls Native Americans. The settlers found the native aboriginal people, First Nation people, First Americans on the ground when they came. First Nation people are not immigrants. When the settlers decided that America was endowed with so much potential and they needed to find people to do the work that was necessary to industrialize America, move America to a prosperous nation, the Europeans went to Africa and brought Africans to come do the work. And this is a second category of people. The Africans themselves never sought to say, let's go conquer, let's go to America to work. The Africans were never immigrants in the sense because an immigrant is somebody who voluntarily moves from one geographical area to another geographical area to settle for work and for prosperity. When you move from France to America, you are essentially on free will to go look for work, for prosperity, start a business, start a family. Originally, immigrants. So when people say America is a country of immigrants, that is true, and that is also partly not true because there are two groups of people that are not immigrants in America, and those are the First Nation people and the foundational Black American. What does this mean if they're not part of the larger conversation of immigrants? That means that the people who have a right to call this country their country, since they are not essentially immigrants or part of the larger conversation of the immigrant discourse, are the First Nation people and the foundational Black Americans. These are the only two group of people that can then say this is home because we did not come here for prosperity. Everybody can say this is home. My kids, the kids of every immigrant, European immigrants, African immigrants, Chinese immigrant, Asian American immigrants, all of these people came to America for prosperity. And yes, we can call America home, but the one people who can be indigenous to this land would be the First Nation people and the generational people who were brought from Africa who then became slaves. But that's not all we want to talk about. I just lay emphasis to be able to understand from my perspective to push this conversation into that. And then now the generational, the foundation blacks are now calling themselves African American. And for me, it just throws me off because I came from Africa and I acquired American citizenship, and I cannot even call myself African American. I came looking for a better life. They did not come here looking for a better life. I am an immigrant because I wanted to, like the Europeans before me and the Europeans with me and the Europeans that are going to come after me are coming here to seek for a better future, a better life for myself, my family. And if you call yourself African American, are you not taking away from your originality? Are you not taking away from your roots? Are you not taking away from the fact that you did not come to America out of free will? Somebody else brought you here, and then this became your home, which means you have no other home because it was not free will. You were stolen, wrestled out of your home, and brought to a foreign country. When people leave out of free will, and that's why I was going to point to you when the Europeans migrated to America, they still labeled themselves whatever country they came from, German American, French American, Italian American, Irish American after the Second World War. When America was getting ready to get into the war, America started to pressure those European communities for loyalty. We saw that the European communities, because they wanted to be loyal to America, started to dissociate themselves with their labels. So they were no longer European Americans, they were no longer Irish Americans. They essentially were only Americans to show their loyalty to America. These were people that just came from Europe. Even during the antebellum slavery period, Europeans were still migrating to America. Most of them were avoiding the South, going up north and setting up shop. Most of them were Irish, German, and they kept their identity. And so I am not satisfied or I'm not happy with a label that a group of people who are foundational, who should see this ground and be treated as aboriginal natives of this ground, foundational black people, cannot label themselves African America because that says that America is not their home. America is not theirs to claim. Africa is theirs to claim. Now, you could still have your roots because the Europeans do that. You could still have partnership with Africa in trade, in economics, in development. I find it during this particular African Black History Month that we stop using labels like African American to define the foundational Black Americans who are aboriginals to this land because the European brought them to this land without their will. It was not agreed upon. It was not voluntary. It was forced. And if you force them and this is all they know, then this becomes their land. So let's go ahead and try to understand the origins of how that name and who were the architects behind, and does it have a significant benefit to this community?
Since 1619 and the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in Virginia, standard terminology to describe Africans living in America was colored or Negro. For over 360 years, as blacks were relegated to second class citizenship.
And in modern times, the liberal left pushed to change colored to people of color. I don't like to be referred to as a person of color because it it's just the opposite of colored. What's the difference between a colored and a person of color? White people are excluded from all of this label. And I wanted to know why white people are not included in any of these labels. Is it because white people are inferior? Is it because white people are superior to the colored? What is the justification that went into excluding white people from every other person? Martin Luther King said, I want to be judged by the content of my character than the color of my skin, paraphrasing, of course. But America has become this racial hustling market where the center focus from the left party is color, the color of your skin, because the goal is for the coloreds to get to where.
That reinforced oppression have been used to describe them. But as centuries passed, black people have at times fought to break free from derogatory labels. After the Civil War, several black people dispensed with the names given them by their former enslavers. This would continue even into the 1900s when, during the height of the civil rights movement, black leaders strongly rebelled against Jim Crow labels. But for mainstream America, a major turning point came in the late 1980s. On this day in 1988, a group of black leaders, including Reverend Jesse Jackson and representatives from the NAACP, met to discuss the national black agenda. It was here that Jackson and his peers catapulted the term African American into the country's lexicon. The term has been used since the 1970s, but never.
So this Democratic leader was one of the people that spearheaded this narrative to steal from the foundational blacks, the people who have a right to lay claims to the lands of America because they did not come here like everybody else. Everybody in America, except the first people and the foundational blacks, came here for greener pastures. What is the essence to label yourself African if you have no economic power to leverage with the Africans? This is just a name, a feel good name. Africa is not a black continent. It's a continent with a majority black people, but it's not a black continent. All of North Africa is majority not black. South Africa has had white people living in South Africa for over 500 years. Now, whether we agree that they are part of South Africa, they have been there for 500 years. When people like Jesse Jackson push the narrative to change the labels of black people in America to African American, are they not robbing, are they not stealing from the core, the fundamental of the black people being native aborigines to this land? I think he is doing a disservice. And I think the black American, the foundational black Americans must dissociate themselves. When they say America is a country of immigrants, you do not fall in that category because you are never an immigrant. And so America is your country, and America is also a country of immigrants. The whites, the Africans, the Chinese, the Asians, the Hispanics, all a group of people who are immigrants. Native Americans and Black Americans are not immigrants. So they're two groups of people. And you must not then take away to go attach yourself with an immigrant group that came from somewhere for prosperity because you never came here for prosperity. Let's keep watching.
Gained widespread acceptance until after this Chicago convention. Reverend Jackson said, "To be called African Americans has cultural integrity. It puts us in our proper historical context. Every ethnic group in this country has a reference to some land base, some historical cultural base. African Americans have hit that level of cultural maturity." Jackson.
And that's where I disagree with him. Yes, every ethnic group in this country has a reference to some land base. Yes, the Europeans are from Europe, the Chinese are from Asian, the Mexican from Central America or from North America, the Canadians from Europe. Essentially, one could argue that the African slaves are from Africa. But the difference between these two groups are all of these people had free will when they came to this land. Choice. They got up, bought a ticket, and said, I want to go to America to seek an opportunity. I've heard that it's the land of opportunity. These are the only group of people that were not looking for opportunities. You cannot be in the same class of people seeking opportunities when you did not come here to seek opportunities. The only time you go somewhere to not seek opportunity is when you go home. If you are at home, you are not seeking opportunities. It's your home. You go to a foreign land to get opportunities. During this month, I think it's time for us to take account and step back and say, you can be black. You can be a foundational black. You could be African black, Caribbean black, but you cannot be African American because somebody from Jamaica who comes to America has to then label themselves African American when they don't even have any ties to Africa. Now we could see the ships moved from Africa to the Caribbeans, and then that makes them African Americans. But the Europeans don't call themselves European American. There was a time they did call themselves that, but they no longer do that. And we're going to watch a video as to why they no longer call themselves European Americans or German Americans or Italian Americans. What is the essence to add a moniker to your Americanness?
Stated that other races could connect their heritage to their mother countries with a sense of pride and acceptance. The term rose to prominence because it was considered
More appropriate than black or colored. And today, so colored was not appropriate, but today we find ourselves calling black people of color. So they've removed the ed at the end of the color, and that makes it appropriate. So the single distinction was the ed colored has been removed, and now it's people of color, no longer colored people. Let's switch up and try to understand how Europeans changed their labels. How did that work for the Europeans? Because the Europeans were the true immigrants.
At the time of World War One, we are at the peak of immigration. More people came into this country in 1907 than any other time in our history. America is a nation of immigrants
And I'll dispute this because I know this is the History Channel, but I think over 10 million people came in the 1800s because we find that Trump's grandfather, Frederick Trump, was part of that expedition in the late 1800s when he arrived in New York, and his child, Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father, but he came from Bavaria. He came from Germany to New York, and there were tens of millions of people that came during that time. So to say that more people came in the 1900, I find it a little doubtful. But yes, a lot of people came in the 1900, but so too in the late 1800s.
1914 when Europe goes to war. And Woodrow Wilson recognizes this. In fact, in his address for neutrality, Wilson urges Americans to avoid violently taking sides, afraid that the different ethnicities might line up against each other.
He realizes that creating national unity, what he calls 100% Americanism, is going to be a key factor in winning the war.
100%
Americanism was pushed on the European immigrants, but never pushed on the black indigenous. Let's take a moment and think about this. On the one hand, urging the Europeans to be loyal to America, and loyalty is only to America. And most often, this were people that were just jumping off the European boats. Some of them did not speak a single word of English, and they found themselves being loyal to America and did not even understand the American into a new country that was beginning to fight war with their homeland where they were coming from. And they were asked to not to pick a side, and the side has to be America. And never has the narrative been placed on black people, indigenous people, that you have to be loyal to your homeland. They have constantly been educated and indoctrinated that they have to have the attachment to a foreign continent.
notion that immigrants had to renounce any sort of ties to their homelands, political ties, cultural ties, economic ties, to be considered 100% loyal. It was this notion that the hyphen, Irish American, French American, that the hyphen represented divided loyalties that weakened.
Your commitment to the United States. Now, does that mean African American means divided loyalty? They are not loyal to America, their country, of which they are not immigrants, and they have divided. Because why are you calling yourself African if you have no strategic business interest in Africa? If you have no financial ability, no resource to be able to partner with Africa and grow yourself in Africa? What is the benefit? What is the essence? I asked earlier. Is this just a feel good name? Is this just for historical context? Is this just to say we have struggled in America and we don't belong here? So let's just label ourselves.
Complicated. Many German immigrants and German Americans supported Germany. There were some, however, who did not. There could be the complication of Russian Jews who had fled Russia because of persecution. They were actually not sympathetic to Russia's cause in the First World War. But on the other hand, you had a lot of immigrants, like Italians, for example, French, British, who were very supportive of the Allied side. And immigrant communities were diverse in their reaction to the war, just like Americans at large.
Once the United States enters the war, suspicions of immigrants turn into outright fear.
The immigrant group that suffered the most were German immigrants. They were considered enemy aliens. They had to go down to the police station, be fingerprinted, photographed, and had to carry around an identification card. They were put under surveillance by the government and also by their communities.
You're no longer allowed to teach German in schools. Any expression of German culture is repressed. And
Germans still make a vast majority of white America. When white America hears you speak with an accent and you happen to be black, they ask you questions like, why did you come here? I have been asked that question. And before doing this research, I said things like, I came to go to school because I did not know the history. I thought this was a white country. And the person asking me was asking me because this was essentially his ancestral land. And he was asking why I came here and am I adding value? But today I'm not going to answer that question in that regard. I'm going to answer the question. I came as an immigrant, as your forefathers before you, as your grandfather, your great grandfather came, as Donald Trump's grandfather came. That's the same reason I came looking for prosperity in the land of immigrants. It's the reason why everybody except two groups find themselves in America. That's where the Irish, the Germans, the Italians, the Chinese came to America for the gold rush. Every group, bar two, came here for opportunities. So when somebody asks you, why did you come here? I came just like you or your fathers or your forefathers to look for opportunity. It's very important for white America to understand that they are descendants of immigrants. And two generations, as soon as you have a child in America and that child has a child, that's two generations removed. And that is the American story. And we cannot lose focus and have black Americans label themselves anything other than Americans. I don't even want them to label themselves black American because this is their home rightfully. Before this Europeans, all of this white MAGA population that you're looking at are first generation Americans. I was watching a video yesterday of the former governor of Illinois, Blagojevich, who just recently got. Dude is about 50, 60 years old. His father came from Serbia. He's first generation American. His kids are second generation. But somebody like that would look down on some other immigrant from a poorer country. He's to the left, so he may not do that. But if he was to the right, you look at people like Charlie Kirk, you look at people, most of this right wingers, most of this MAGA people that are anti-immigration are first, and not even, most of them are naturalized citizens. Most of them are first generation. They can literally still speak the foreign languages, or at least when they speak to their grandma, they hear the language of their grandparents. But they will make you think that their descendants go back to the Mayflower. Their descendants go back to the settlers. No, I don't even think that they go far back into the 80s. These are first generation white Americans, white immigrants, Polish, Irish, Czech, mostly Eastern European people. And a little respect should be shown. So the reason why we could celebrate Black History Month and Native American History Month is because it's their country, and every other person they're not obliged to celebrate you. You're an immigrant. You're descendants of immigrants. They are not. This is their home. So if it's your home, you get to decide what you want to celebrate and what you don't want to celebrate. That's why Black History Month should be taught. But the way it's being taught should be changed. It should be taught that this is your home. You're not an immigrant. You're not descendants of immigrant. You have no immigrant blood in you compared to everybody else. They're just a majority of white immigrants. Does not mean America is a white country. If you're looking for a white country, buy an air ticket and go to Europe. That's where white countries exist. If you're looking for an Asian country, buy a ticket and go to Asia. You would find Asian countries. You're not going to see a white country in Asia. No, you're not going to see a white country in the continent of Africa. You could see white people, Asian people in some countries in Africa, but majority you will see black people.
And German newspapers, of which there were many, were forced to cancel.
We had some silly things like people changing the name of hamburgers to Liberty sandwiches, and some not silly things where vigilante groups would attack German immigrants. There were examples of people being tardy feathered, being forced to kiss American flags, their houses being painted yellow, and even some lynching.
This is one of the most heartbreaking chapters of American history, in which one of the most vibrant ethnic cultures in the United States, that of German Americans, is systematically dismantled in the space of about 2 years.
But on the other hand, we also saw the sort of valorization of immigrant cultures in a way that we had not seen before the United States. A lot of championing of Italian immigrants' patriotism, Russian Jews' patriotism, Polish patriotism, and the ways that these groups were contributing.
1 out of every 5 soldiers in the U.S. Armed Forces is an immigrant, and they are serving in every branch.
Some immigrant groups thought, this is a path to citizenship for me. They were drafted, they went, and
Which has been something that has been practiced since the spirit of time. People have generally used the U.S. Military as a path to citizenship. But when this was done by Europeans, it was okay. When it was done by European immigrants, it was okay. When brown and black people started taking advantage of this path to citizenship, it became a problem. So this is Black History Month. Black history should be celebrated because blacks in America can say, this is my country. This is my forefathers' country. I did not come here. I did not migrate to America seeking for opportunities like your ancestors, your people migrated here seeking for opportunities. So in my country, I get to celebrate me. I don't have to celebrate White History Month because whites are immigrants. We could, if we wanted to, we have to celebrate Native American Heritage Month because it's their country. It's important to know that the white culture it's a prosperous culture. They like to have things organized, develop, and work in certain ways. I have a strong belief, and a lot of people might disagree, that if the balance of power changes where white immigrants and their descendants are no longer in the majority of America, the fabric, the core, the essence of America is going to be lost. And America is not going to be this great country again. Now, after having said that, it does not mean that it's a white country. Europeans went to Australia, met their aborigines, took their lands, and transformed the land into a prosperous nation. The Europeans went to New Zealand, did exactly that. The Europeans went to Hong Kong, did exactly that. The Europeans went to South Africa. They make up 7% of the population, but they were able to transform South Africa into the economic hub that we see today. When you look at Europe, when you look at immigrants to America, when you compare Haiti and DR, which had the Spanish influence in DR, but the French decided to punish the Haitians, then you look at the disparity between the two. So in a context like this, you could be a minority in your own country, like in Australia, like the blacks in America, the foundational blacks are a minority in their country. The Aboriginal Indians are a minority in their country, and the Europeans are a majority in a country they immigrated to. And I think that balance of power should stay if America wants to be a prosperous nation, because you need the drive and forward thinkingness of the Europeans. But the Europeans also need to understand that the blacks and the Native Americans are indigenous people that need to have spatial statuses, because usually you create spatial statuses for indigenous people. Canada has it for First Nation people. America has it for tribal and native people, and they should have the same spatial status for Black Americans. And that starts by identifying and recognizing that they are not in the immigrant conversation. On Village Boy Podcast, if you've liked the content so far, please subscribe. Please leave your comment. Let's have an interesting conversation. I'm sure a lot of people would disagree with me. I would like to have a civil conversation on why you disagree with me and what your points are, so we can then evolve the conversation and more. But I'm hoping to see a lot of likes and a lot of subscriptions. Thank you.